Okay, welcome back, guys. I'll just go over how double click actually seems to open a component for editing now. And this is something that's new to SketchUp, or at least I wasn't aware of it anyway. I can't swear that it's new. This online version of it seems to be constantly updating, and there's new little features and things that are being added. So sometimes you can get a surprise when you're working in it. Inside and outside and on center measurements we'll have a look at. 16-inch centers. Why 16-inch centers are so common in construction, meaning how so many different types of studs and joists and rafters are 16 inches apart. And we'll add the plywood to the floor. We're looking today at using this type of plywood. This is also pressure treated. It's a 4-foot by 8-foot sheet of plywood. It's 3/4 of an inch thick. So the thing about centers, there's really three ways that you can measure the distance between two things. And in construction, we specify if we are measuring a certain way. So you can measure between two things, which we would call the inside measurement. So this is an inside measurement here, moving from the inside surface of this object to the inside surface of this object. You could have an outside measurement, which is you're now measuring from the outside of this object to the outside of the next object. Or you can have an on-center measurement, which is measuring the distance between the centers of those objects. And we'll keep that just as it is for now, because this is going to get, nothing's ever as simple as it really seems, right? So the reason that we have 16-inch centers takes a little bit of explanation. The first thing is 16-inch centers, when you put three of them together, adds up to 48 inches, which is 4 feet. And most construction materials that are panels, so plywood, drywall, siding, certain types of roof covers, they come in 8-foot by 4-foot sections, or sometimes 12-foot by 4-foot sections. So having that 48-inch centers allows us to arrange our construction so that the edges of these sheets always have a joist or a stud or a rafter behind them to support them. Now, when we're looking at our shed here, this is our floor, and we have that piece of plywood that we're putting on top of it. If you look at this, if we actually put it on the center of the studs and they're 16 inches apart, this is what it looks like. And if you look over at this corner right here, this would be the outside edge of our shed, and we would have a little sort of a ledge there, a little gap on the outside of our shed. And that's not really good. You don't want this little gap here. You want it to be nice and flush so that this is a nice straight edge. So when we do shift that piece of plywood down, we're going to run into a little bit of a problem with this edge of it as we shift it. Hopefully I can make things a little more clear just by putting a plan up of a wall that's being built and showing you that there are 16-inch centers that these studs sit on. And that is because when you look at this wall that has the drywall up, and the drywall is all screwed to the wall right now, you have seams in the drywall, like where I'm drawing this red line here. And these seams, if you look at them, they run straight up and down, and on each side of the seam where there's a seam, there's a set of screws holding it to the wall. An experienced carpenter, an experienced renovator will make sure that as he's building the wall, there's a piece of wood behind those seams for those screws to go into. And that's the thing that we're dealing with today when we're moving our joists just a little bit, to make sure that they are supported and that there's wood to screw into behind them. And one final thing, just before we move into the SketchUp part of the day and the demonstration part, a little bit of trivia. Tape measures usually will have the stud locations marked on them. So if you look at this tape measure, the 16 is in red, and you'll see that on a lot of tapes. If the 16 is in red, then the 32 will be in red, and the 48 will be in red, and so on. Those are where the centers of the studs can go. We're going to make sure that every edge of this piece of plywood is supported and every edge of this plywood has wood behind it that you can nail or screw it down to. And where I'm going to show you what happens here, and in order to make things more clear, I'm going to click on that one joist right here and remove it so that we can actually see what's happening with the edges of the plywood when I move it back here. These joists right now are all 16 inches on center, or 1 foot 4 inch. And except for that last one that we had to move as the very last step of our last lesson. Now, if I get that piece of plywood and I move it forward onto its spot here, we can see that the edge of that piece is actually not supported. It's not sitting on top of a piece of, it's not sitting on top of a joist. So you would think, okay, well, you just take that joist and move it back here, and you might see something kind of cool happening there. As you move pieces around in SketchUp, dimensions that you add, if you learn to do that at some point, they automatically change. So this part right here did say 1 foot 4 inches. Now it says 1 foot 2.5 because I've moved that joist back 1.5 inches. The problem with moving the joist back 1.5 inches so that this wood is completely on that joist is that we also need another piece of plywood to complete our floor. So when I take and put another piece of plywood up here, you can see that now the edge of that piece of plywood is not supported. So the thing that you want to do with this joist is to actually move it back halfway, 3/4 of an inch, so that both pieces of plywood are supported on that joist. They sort of share that joist for support. You can also put a screw in this piece of plywood here and this piece of plywood here to hold it down. So that makes sure that that plywood will not move. The simple way to handle that in SketchUp is that, if I can undo a little bit of this here, we're going to take and move all the joists back 3/4 of an inch all at once. This is all stuff that you would have to think of ahead of time if you were building a shed. So I would be making sure that you plan all this out ahead of time. You're moving a joist back 3/4 of an inch. Now, what I did there, I don't know if I've showed you guys this before, but if you click and drag with SketchUp, you can select many things at once. The problem is you have to be careful because if you click and drag in the wrong spot, it will select everything that's, now I have all the joists and some stuff that I didn't want, right? So if I click off that, but if I click and drag like this, it will select the joist that I want as long as that's all that I touch, as long as I'm doing it. When I move these, I can just click anywhere and I can shift them back along the green axis, and I would enter in 0.75, hit enter, and we're done, right? That now means that I can take this piece of plywood and get it by the proper endpoint here. Oh, see, I did that mistake where I grabbed the wrong thing to move. So I have to make sure that I select the right part, and I grab it right there, put it in its spot. Oh, come on. Okay. I then grab it again right there. Move it here. Move it. I just have to get it in its right spots. And then I grab it again. And I put it right there. And you can see that all those pieces of wood now are supported because we moved all of them back 3/4 of an inch, and that's kind of how the framing works. And you do kind of have to keep the same thing in mind when you're building a wall or whatever it is that you're building, is that you want to make sure that whatever material is going on there to cover it has support behind it. And if you're an experienced carpenter who has done this hundreds of times before, this will be instinctive to you. And if you're just starting out or you're doing it for yourself, you'll probably have to slow down and think about this every single time. So moving into the shed project part of our day, we've actually got a pretty easy day, and we just have to move a couple of things and move one thing, I guess, and do build a piece of plywood on here. So we'll get yourself kind of situated so that you're looking a little bit straight down on the shed is the easy way to do this. And then click your select tool. Select all of these joists by clicking and dragging around them. Now there's probably several other ways you could do this, and you guys might be getting good enough now that you're just developing preferences about the way that you like to do things. But you can click anywhere on any one of these joists, as long as you remember that you need to be on the green axis when you're moving it. So you're on the green axis, let go of your mouse carefully and make sure it's still on the green axis, and then type 0.75, and that will move all those joists back 3/4 of an inch. And we're going to make a sheet of plywood now. So I get my rectangle tool and I start right on that exact top corner there. Pull my rectangle out. I was going outwards from the middle of the rectangle again, so I had to hit Control to do that, and I enter 48,96, and my rectangle is facing the wrong way. So I undo that, and I just try again, and I enter 96,48, and I'm out of the blue plane right now. There we go. Now I'm back in the blue plane. You're working on the blue axis, so your outline has to be in blue. Last time we were working on the red axis, we're kind of facing a different direction, so our outline had to be in red. Now I enter 96,48 and hit enter, and there I've got the surface of my piece of plywood. I grab my push-pull tool, push that up, pull that up 3/4 of an inch. So I start to pull up, then I just enter 0.75, enter, and I can make that into a component. Make component, okay. I get my paint bucket, and if I want to color this to match what color the plywood would really sort of match, I included with this drawing 2 balls here. And the plywood, depending on what type and brand you buy, would actually match up with the color of that sort of orange-ish ball. So I could go to the paint bucket, but instead of taking the paint bucket, 2 options fly out here, and I click the eyedropper. And when I click on that ball, it will pick up that color, and I can add it to that component. So you could just make it green if you wanted. So that is done for actually working on that component, and we just need to copy it over. So it's already selected, and I can just hit move, grab a corner of it, and move it, hit Control so I'm copying it, and I set it right there, and then I just type X2, and hopefully that should get my 3 sheets of plywood. And now our floor is finished, and that is it for the day. And I hope you guys have a great weekend. We should have our floor so that if we look underneath it, we don't see any lines of the plywood, and we should be able to see that those lines of plywood line exactly straight up where those plywood meet. They line exactly straight up on that joist so that they are supported, and so that you could drive a row of screws along this edge of this piece of plywood and this edge of this piece of plywood, and they would both go into this joist. So hope you guys have a great weekend, and I'll try next time out. We will be starting this stud wall right here. So we'll build our simple first basic stud wall. And have a good one, folks.